in the memory of more than 12,000 political prisoners who were executed in summer 1988 in Iran. 30 years of suppression, torture, imprisonment, and executions past an Islamic regime of Iran still carries its barbarity and atrocities. Political prisoners who had already been sentenced and were doing their sentences after 5, 6, 7, and in some other words 8 or 9 years. But they were put before firing squad. There was no trial. They were supposed to be executed by the order of Ayatollah Khomeini. They claimed that there was a trial for every single of them, but that is a lie. They were interrogated and then put before the execution fire guards. No offenses. There was no trial, no indictment, nothing. And they didn't have any right of representation. People were put to death in numbers. Within less than 2.5 months and up to 5 months, over 12,000 people were executed. The vast majority of them were political prisoners who had already been incarcerated. The killing by Islamic Republic of Iran started very early after 1979 in Kurdistan, in Gomba, in south of Iran, in Khuzestan. And the mass execution started in June 8, 1981. 30 years passed from 1988, but still people don't know where their loved ones are buried. They were buried in mass graves and we don't know where exactly they are. Families have been misguided and in some cases have not been given any information. There are over 500 numbers of mass graves in Iran where people don't know how many people are buried there. People were executed in the early days in summer 1988 and were buried in numbers in the nearest mass graves outside of the towns. There is a famous one in west of Tehran called Khabaran. Families of those people who have been executed have been kept in dark over the last 30 years, and in some cases over the last 40 years. They don't know where their loved ones are buried. They don't know why they were executed. They don't know what kind of offenses they were charged with. People have been misguided and sent to the wrong place where there was claimed that was a grave. And after excavations, they found out there was nobody in those graves. There are generation after generations who were born in Iran in the last 40 years with lots of questions which never have been answered. People now, after over 30 years, are starting asking questions. Questions about those ones who were massacred in 1988 during 1980s. The government has categorically failed to answer any of those questions. The people who are now acting as a reformist were used to be interrogators and torturers. Those people who are now acting as a reformers in Iran, they used to issue death sentence for people during the 80s. Number of people have been killed for just having political opinion and being opposing the regime. People have been kept in prison for over 10 years, 8 years, 9 years for just having different political beliefs. I am one of the few survivors of 1980s massacres, executions, and imprisonment. I have spent 7.5 years in Iranian prison from 1981 to 1989. Numbers of my comrades, different age, were executed for just being a political opposition to the government. They were not terrorists. They were not armed. They did not kill anyone. They were just protesting against the government. Teenagers, 13, 14, 17 years old, were put before firing squad in early 1981. People who were kept in prison for 7, 8 years in 1988 were put before firing squads. In some cases, they were 14 or 15 years old when they were arrested in 1981. No crime was committed by political prisoners who had already been sentences. They were taken to the room where they were questioned by the representative of judiciary, prison guards, and information ministry. They were asked whether they were Muslim, whether they had repented, whether they would take part in execution, whether they would write a letter to their families and state that they were repentant. Anyone who said no to those questions were put before firing squads. Don't get me wrong, those questions were arranged and designed to get a no answer. They intended to kill as many as they could. Under the direct order of Ayatollah Khomeini, they were supposed to physically eradicate every single political opponent in 1988. We don't know how many people were executed. Estimated varies, 12,000, 23,000, nobody knows. The only people who know exactly how many people were executed are those who actually perpetrated those atrocities. They never gave families where their loved ones were buried. They never allowed any fake. Families were not allowed to actually gather and mourn their loved ones. Anyone who attempted to find out where the mass grave was were arrested. Today, in summer 2018, after 30 years of massacre in 88 and nearly 40 years of this regime, we don't know how many people were executed in Iran since 1979, and we don't know how many of them were they buried. Families have been kept in dark. There are numbers of children who don't know where their grandparents were buried. There are a number of wives who they don't know where their husbands were buried. They literally massacred a generation. And now, people are starting asking questions. Since January 2018, Iran has faced numbers of political protests in Iran. People are starting questioning, and no one gives them any answer. We kept these ceremonies every year, and this is our duty to keep the memories of our comrades, our fallen comrades, alive. We want people not to forget what happened in Iran in the 80s. We want to encourage the public in Europe to put pressure on their government to stop all the ties within Iran, not to look for any reformist faction of Iranian government. There are not any reformists in Iran. Those people who claim they are reformists, all of them have their hands soaked in blood of innocent people in 1980s. Those who ever been arrested in 2008 and 9, they were part of the massacres in 80s. There is no reformist in Iranian regime. Every single of them is responsible for massacring in 80s and continuing killing. Iranian prisons are full of political prisoners, are people who oppose the regime, who fight for freedom and equality and justice. And still, people are being put before the Congress Sharia court and be sentenced to death and long imprisonment for what they believe. They are not terrorists. They are not armed. They are political activists and freedom fighters. In summer 1988, in every single city in Iran, the government committed genocide. Political prisoners, political activists were rounded off from the street and put back in prison. They were killed without a trial and after being interrogated. And now, even during the last Iranian election, some of the people who were involved in those killings confessed that the number of people who were killed in that time were 23,000. As I said before, we don't know exactly how many people were killed or massacred. We here today, we gathered to remember our fallen comrades and bring to the attention of the public what's going on in our country. Iran is the country where every single household has got one or two in their family who have either been executed in 80s or been in prison in 80s. There is not a single street in Iran who did not witness atrocities during the 80s. From June 1981 up till now, and in fact, from February 1979 up till now, people were arrested because of their belief. People were put in prison because they opposed the regime. People were put before firing squad because they didn't believe in what the regime believes in. And that is exactly what we have been facing in Iran. Total repression, total executions. And it's a government responsible. It doesn't matter who is in charge. Rouhani, Khatami, Mousavi, any of them. All of them were involved in killing and massacring political activists. 40 years of bloodshed, 40 years of torture, imprisonment, and executions. Thank you very much.